The emerald green evening gown cascaded down Victoria's slender frame, catching the muted light of their bedroom chandelier. Ethan watched his wife adjust the diamond clasp at her throat, her expression entirely devoid of warmth as she told him he wasn't welcome at her firm's gala. She sprayed an unfamiliar, heavy amber perfume, a scent that didn't belong to her collection. As the front door clicked shut, leaving Ethan in the sprawling silence of their home, he realized the chill in their marriage wasn't just indifference. It was a carefully constructed cover. Asterisk if you find yourself captivated by hidden truths and the silent shattering of vows. Subscribe and stay with us as this story unfolds. The emerald green evening gown cascaded down Victoria's slender frame, catching the muted light of their bedroom chandelier. Ethan stood in the doorway, his own tuxedo still sealed in its plastic dry-cleaning bag, hooked over his index finger. He watched his wife of 7 years adjust a diamond clasp at her throat. Her expression in the vanity mirror was entirely devoid of warmth, calculating and perfectly composed. "I'm telling you, Ethan, it's better if you don't come," Victoria said. Her voice was as polished and cold as the marble countertop she leaned against. She didn't bother to turn around to meet his eyes. Ethan tightened his grip on the plastic bag, the crinkling sound loud in the tense silence. "It's the Whitmore Capital Annual Gala. Spouses are always invited, Victoria. Mark and Amanda are going." Victoria paused her meticulous adjustments. She picked up a heavy glass bottle of perfume from the tray. She sprayed it into the air and walked through the falling mist, a dense, musky scent of dark amber and sandalwood that Ethan didn't recognize. It was completely unlike her usual light, floral signature. It smelled heavy. It smelled distinctly masculine. "Mark is a senior partner. You are." She waved a manicured hand dismissively, her diamond rings catching the light. She searched for a polite word, failed, and settled for cruelty. "Stay home, Ethan. You'd embarrass me. You don't know how to talk to these people. You don't belong in that room." The words hung in the sterile, conditioned air of their Oakwood Estates master suite. There was no explosive argument, no shattered glass or raised voices. Just the quiet, devastating precision of a surgeon's scalpel severing a vital artery. Ethan didn't fight back. The exhaustion of trying to bridge the ever-widening gap between them suddenly overwhelmed him. He simply nodded, feeling the remaining warmth drain from his chest. "Fine," he murmured, his voice hollow. "Have a good night." He heard the sharp, rhythmic click of her designer heels retreating down the hardwood hallway, followed moments later by the heavy, definitive thud of the front door closing. Silence violently reclaimed the massive house, wrapping around Ethan like a suffocating blanket. Their marriage had been fracturing for over a year, reduced to polite nods, separate bank accounts, and carefully scheduled routines. But tonight felt different. Tonight was terminal. The blatant disrespect was a new, unforgivable threshold. Restless, Ethan wandered downstairs. The heavy scent of that unfamiliar, amber perfume still lingered in the foyer, an invisible intruder mocking him. It gnawed at his instincts. Seeking a mundane distraction to quiet his racing mind, he decided to move her daily commuter sedan into the garage to protect it from the forecasted midnight frost. She had taken an Uber Black to the gala anyway. He stepped out into the biting Chicago night air and opened the door of her sedan. As he slid into the driver's seat, his hand brushed against something soft wedged tightly between the leather center console and the passenger seat. Frowning, he pulled it free. It was a heavy silk men's scarf, woven in a distinct, expensive houndstooth pattern. Ethan didn't own a scarf like this. He couldn't even afford the brand tag stitched into the hem. He brought the fabric closer, and his stomach violently plummeted. The silk was drenched in the exact same dark amber and sandalwood scent Victoria had just sprayed on herself. His hands began to tremble, the cold air suddenly forgotten. As he looked up, breathing shallowly, his eyes locked onto the small black device mounted neatly behind the rearview mirror. The dashcam. Its tiny blue light was blinking steadily, silently recording the dark, empty driveway, holding secrets it was never meant to capture. Ethan sat frozen in the driver's seat, the frigid Chicago air seeping through his thin sweater. The silk scarf felt unnaturally heavy in his hands, the fabric soft and damning. The scent, dark amber, sandalwood, and something distinctly musky, was no longer just an anomaly in their master bathroom. It was a physical trespass in her private space. He squeezed his eyes shut, leaning his head against the cold leather steering wheel. For months, Victoria had been distant, her excuses polished and impenetrable. She spoke of late strategy meetings at Whitmore Capital, of client dinners that ran well past midnight. He had accepted them without protest, clinging to the naive hope that their marital slump was just a byproduct of her demanding career. But the houndstooth fabric crushed in his fist told a vastly different story. It spoke of proximity. It spoke of someone sitting close enough in the passenger seat to leave behind a piece of their wardrobe. The tiny blue light of the dashcam pulsed steadily behind the rearview mirror, casting a faint glow in the dark cabin. It was a high-end model Victoria had insisted on installing after a minor fender bender last winter. It recorded ultra-high-definition video of the road, but Ethan knew it also possessed a sensitive internal microphone designed to capture cabin audio. He faced a paralyzing choice. He could shove the silk scarf back into the dark crevice between the seats, walk back inside, and pour himself a stiff drink. He could maintain the fragile, sterile peace of their Oakwood Estates home, pretending the chill in his wife's eyes was merely professional exhaustion. Or he could reach up, disconnect that camera, and completely shatter the illusion. If he pulled that memory card, there would be no going back. The comfortable lie would burn to the ground. His jaw tightened. The echo of her voice from just 20 minutes ago, "Stay home, Ethan. You'd embarrass me," rang in his ears, stripping away the last of his hesitation. He wasn't just being left behind. He was being carefully managed. With a sharp, shaky intake of breath, Ethan reached up and unclipped the device from its mount. The blue recording light died instantly. He locked the sedan and walked back into the sprawling, empty house. The silence in the foyer no longer felt like a suffocating blanket. It felt like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. He bypassed the living room and headed straight for his home office, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. Sitting at his mahogany desk, he extracted the micro SD card with trembling fingers and slid it into the side of his laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a pale, unforgiving glow across his face. A master folder appeared, neatly organized by date and timestamps. His cursor hovered over a cluster of files from the previous Tuesday, a night Victoria had explicitly texted him not to wait up because she was locked in a boardroom with the executive team. His pulse hammered against his ribs, a dull, rhythmic thud in the quiet room. He took a deep breath and double-clicked the first audio file. The media player opened, the progress bar resting at the 0-second mark before the muffled sound of a car engine filled the quiet room. The progress bar on the media player began to move, pushing a wave of crisp, high-definition audio through the laptop speakers. First came the familiar hum of Victoria's sedan engine, followed by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers. It had rained heavily last Tuesday. Ethan remembered staying up late, keeping a plate of dinner warm in the oven, only for her to text him at 11 o'clock claiming the Whitmore Capital strategy meeting was still ongoing. He stared at the video feed accompanying the audio. The dashcam captured the slick, rain-swept streets of downtown Chicago. But the GPS coordinates stamped in the bottom right corner of the screen didn't align with her corporate office building. Instead, the sedan navigated through the glittering, upscale district, eventually slowing down beneath the distinct neon glow of a familiar awning. The reflection on the wet hood spelled it out clearly, the Sapphire Lounge. Ethan's stomach tightened. The Sapphire Lounge was an exclusive, dimly lit jazz bar, entirely inappropriate for a late-night executive board meeting. On the screen, the car idled near the valet lane. For 3 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Just the steady vibration of the engine and the faint patter of rain. Then, the distinct, heavy thud of the passenger side door opening echoed through the speakers. A gust of ambient city noise, distant traffic, a muffled jazz saxophone, spilled into the cabin before the door firmly shut, instantly sealing the intimacy of the car. The rustle of heavy fabric followed. It sounded exactly like the thick houndstooth silk scarf currently resting on Ethan's mahogany desk. "You're late," a male voice murmured. It was a rich, confident baritone, entirely relaxed. There was no formal greeting, no professional distance. It was the voice of a man who belonged exactly where he was sitting. Ethan braced himself for Victoria's standard, abrasive reprimand. He waited for the icy, calculating tone that had become the permanent soundtrack of his own home. Instead, a soft, breathy chuckle drifted from the laptop speakers. "Traffic on Lakeshore was a nightmare," Victoria replied. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't just warm. It was playful, yielding, and utterly devoted. It was a melodic tone Ethan hadn't heard since their first year of marriage. And as he listened closer, he realized it was a tone she had perhaps never truly given him at all. The sound of a seatbelt clicking into place was followed by a long, agonizing pause. Then, the unmistakable rustle of leather seating and a deep, prolonged sigh. They were kissing. Ethan sat perfectly still in the sterile silence of his home office, the digital audio tearing through his chest with surgical precision. "I missed you," Victoria whispered, the sensitive microphone picking up the proximity of her mouth. "I hate having to go back to him tonight. It's getting harder to look at him." Ethan hovered his trembling finger over the spacebar, his vision blurring at the edges. He had the option to slam the laptop shut and confront her blindly when she returned from the gala, preserving a tiny fraction of his pride. But the horrifying tenderness in her voice anchored him to the leather chair. He needed to know just how deep the rot went, even if it completely destroyed him. He let the audio play, listening as the man shifted comfortably in the passenger seat. "Just a little longer, Vic," the man replied smoothly, his tone laced with a haunting familiarity. "Once the merger goes public, you won't have to pretend anymore. We'll have everything back the way it was." Before Ethan could process the strange phrasing of the man's promise, the timestamp on the screen jumped, and his cell phone resting on the desk abruptly lit up with a harsh, bright notification. The harsh glow of the cell phone screen illuminated the dark mahogany of Ethan's desk, an obnoxious intrusion against the muffled, intimate whispers still playing from the dashcam audio. He dragged his eyes away from the laptop's progress bar. The notification was a standard iCloud calendar alert, brightly flashing a familiar blue icon. He swallowed hard. He and Victoria still shared an old Apple ID from the first year of their marriage, mostly for syncing digital photo albums they hadn't updated since a trip to Napa Valley. Occasionally, automated calendar invites from her work email would accidentally cross over, usually mundane reminders for quarterly tax filings or dry cleaning pickups. But the bright, bold text staring up at him was anything but mundane. Asterisk event reminder, the Archer Hotel, penthouse suite reservation. The timestamp confirmed the reservation began precisely 30 minutes ago, the exact time Victoria had left their Oakwood Estates home, wearing that emerald green evening gown and the heavy amber perfume. The location was miles away from the Whitmore Capitol building. Ethan picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He could swipe the notification away, dismiss it as a glitch or a corporate booking made in her name for an out-of-town client. It was the safer, more cowardly choice, preserving a sliver of the lie she had constructed. But the houndstooth scarf resting near his elbow, radiating that dark, musky scent, anchored him to the brutal reality of the night. There was no client. There was no gala. The entire evening was an elaborate, cruel fiction designed specifically to leave him behind. He pressed his thumb against the screen, unlocking the phone and forcing the shared calendar app to open. A detailed itinerary loaded instantly, not just for tonight, but a pattern stretching back 6 months. Every late strategy meeting, every weekend corporate retreat, every client dinner at Harborview was meticulously logged alongside discreet hotel reservations and private dining rooms. His vision blurred slightly as the sheer volume of deceit materialized in front of him. The Whitmore Capitol Gala wasn't an event she was ashamed to bring him to. It was merely the most convenient alibi she had found this quarter. The audio from the dashcam continued to hum in the background, a relentless soundtrack to his unraveling life. The man's voice, low and confident, broke through the white noise of Ethan's spiraling thoughts. "I've got the suite at the Archer booked for the 25th. The baritone voice crackled through the speakers, directly confirming the calendar alert glowing in Ethan's hand. Victoria's response was immediate, filled with a breathless anticipation Ethan had never inspired. "The 25th is perfect. It's the firm's annual gala. I'll just tell Ethan he's not invited. It's easier than starting a fight." "He doesn't suspect?" the man asked, the rustle of leather seats indicating he was shifting closer to her. "Ethan?" Victoria's tone shifted back to the icy, dismissive edge she usually reserved for him, but this time, she was using it about him. "No, he's comfortable. He likes the house, he likes the routine. As long as I keep the surface smooth, he doesn't look underneath." The casual dismissal of his entire existence, of his 7 years of loyalty, felt like a physical blow to Ethan's chest. He dropped the phone onto the desk, the screen still glowing with the damning calendar invite. He had been nothing more than a convenient, oblivious placeholder, a prop in a life she was actively dismantling. He needed a name. The elaborate deception, the specific perfume, the expensive silk scarf. None of it mattered as much as the identity of the man who had stolen his wife. Ethan leaned over the laptop, his fingers frantically scanning the timeline of the dashcam audio files, searching for the moment she slipped and used a name. He selected a file from 3 weeks prior, dragging the cursor to a spike in the audio wave, desperate for the final piece of the devastating puzzle. The audio wave on the laptop screen spiked sharply around the 8-minute mark of a recording dated exactly 3 weeks ago. Ethan stared at the visual representation of sound, his heart pounding a steady, terrified rhythm against his ribs. The digital progress bar glided forward, moving closer to the climax he was desperately seeking. The earlier recordings had provided the brutal mechanics of the affair, the locations, the dates, the physical intimacy. But the missing piece was the name, the human element that would finally give the betrayal a face. He hunched over his mahogany desk, his breath shallow in the quiet, sterile air of the home office. He had the power to stop the audio, to close the laptop and walk away with a sliver of plausible deniability. He could confront Victoria with the scarf and the calendar invite, perhaps salvage an ounce of his dignity in a messy divorce, without ever needing to know the specific details of his replacement. But the dark amber scent radiating from the houndstooth scarf near his elbow anchored him. He needed the full, excruciating truth, no matter the cost. The audio crackled as the recording captured the sudden, harsh sound of tires squealing on wet pavement. The dashcam video flared with the blinding headlights of an oncoming car that had briefly drifted into Victoria's lane on Lakeshore Drive. "Jesus!" Victoria's voice pitched high in panic, a sharp, uncharacteristic sound of terror. "Watch out." The sedan swerved violently, the internal microphone picking up the chaotic rustle of clothing and the thud of a briefcase hitting the floorboard. Ethan's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He waited for the inevitable impact, the horrifying crunch of metal. Instead, the car stabilized, the engine roaring as Victoria accelerated away from the near collision. The heavy silence in the cabin stretched for 5 agonizing seconds, broken only by the frantic, heavy breathing of both occupants. "I've got it. I've got it." The man's deep baritone voice rumbled through the speakers, remarkably steady despite the adrenaline spike. He let out a long, slow breath. That was close. Victoria's breathing began to slow, the panic slowly seeping out of her voice, replaced by a profound, trembling relief. "Are you okay? You didn't hit the dashboard?" "I'm fine, Vic. I'm fine." The man chuckled softly, the sound incredibly intimate in the small, enclosed space of the sedan. "God," Victoria whispered, her tone suddenly dropping an octave, heavy with a raw, desperate affection Ethan had never been given. She paused, the rustle of leather indicating she was turning toward him in the passenger seat. "You terrified me, Derek. I can't lose you again." Ethan froze. The air in his lungs violently evacuated. The name echoed through the high-definition speakers, a solitary, devastating word that completely destroyed the foundation of his entire life. Derek. He stared blindly at the glowing screen, his mind violently struggling to process the impossible information. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be a different Derek. The familiarity in the man's confident voice, the specific promise to have everything back the way it was, it all suddenly aligned with horrifying clarity. Derek Stone, Victoria's wealthy, powerful ex-husband, the man she had supposedly despised, the toxic relationship she swore she had spent years recovering from, the man whose very name was strictly forbidden in their Oakwood Estates home, the man Ethan had spent 7 years patiently helping her forget. Ethan's gaze dropped slowly to the heavy silk houndstooth scarf. The puzzle pieces clicked together with a sickening snap. The dark amber and sandalwood perfume. The confident, relaxed baritone. The sophisticated cruelty of the deception. Victoria hadn't just found a new lover at Whitmore Capital. She had never truly left her old one. The name hung in the quiet air of Ethan's home office, a toxic echo that systematically dismantled the last 7 years of his life. Derek. The single word felt heavier than the dark, musky scent radiating from the houndstooth scarf on his desk. He stared at the laptop screen, the audio progress bar continuing its steady, indifferent march across the bottom of the video player. But the sounds of the Chicago traffic and the intimate whispers in the sedan were now just white noise against the deafening roar of his own realization. Ethan slowly pushed his chair back from the mahogany desk. The physical space of the room suddenly felt entirely wrong, as if the walls of their Oakwood Estates home were closing in on a life that had never belonged to him. The meticulously chosen furniture, the expensive art Victoria had insisted on hanging, the quiet routines they had established, none of it was a foundation for a future together. It was a holding pattern, a safe, comfortable harbor she had anchored herself in while waiting for the storm of her previous life to pass. He picked up the heavy silk scarf again, the expensive fabric sliding smoothly through his fingers. The dark amber and sandalwood scent was no longer just an unfamiliar perfume. It was the distinct smell of Derek Stone's lingering presence, a ghost that had apparently never left Victoria's side. The sick, twisted reality of the situation began to settle into Ethan's bones. She hadn't just cheated on him. She had used him. He was the stable, unremarkable man who provided the perfect contrast to Derek's volatile, high-stakes world. He was the emotional palate cleanser she needed between acts of a play she was never truly finished with. The urge to violently react surged through Ethan's veins. He looked at his phone, the calendar alert for the Archer Hotel still glowing faintly on the locked screen. He had the address. He knew exactly where they were, right at this very moment, celebrating the upcoming merger and laughing at the convenient, oblivious husband left behind in the suburbs. He could drive downtown, burst into the penthouse suite, and tear the carefully constructed illusion of their sophisticated affair to shreds. He could throw the scarf in Derek's face and scream until his throat was raw. It would be a messy, chaotic, satisfying explosion of the truth. But as quickly as the rage flared, it was extinguished by a profound, suffocating exhaustion. What would an explosive confrontation actually achieve? Victoria wouldn't beg for forgiveness. She wouldn't fall to her knees in remorse. She would simply look at him with the same cold, calculating eyes she had used earlier that evening when she told him he didn't belong in her world. Confronting them would only give them the satisfaction of his destruction. It would force him into a humiliating, public battle against a man with infinitely more resources and a woman who had already meticulously planned his obsolescence. He dropped the scarf back onto the desk, next to the laptop. The silence of the large house, which had felt so oppressive just an hour ago, now felt entirely appropriate. It was an empty vessel, just like their marriage. Ethan realized with terrifying clarity that fighting for a woman who had never truly been his was a battle already lost. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted to be free of the lie. The silence in the Oakwood Estates home had transformed from a suffocating blanket into a hollow, echoing cavern. Ethan stood perfectly still in the center of his home office, the digital glow of the laptop screen illuminating the heavy silk houndstooth scarf resting on his mahogany desk. The dashcam footage had finally ended, the media player resetting to a black screen, but the agonizing reality of Victoria's whispered confessions to Derek Stone continued to play on a brutal loop in his mind. He looked at his watch. It was nearing midnight. The Phantom Gala at Whitmore Capital was presumably winding down, and the private, devastating reality of the Archer Hotel penthouse was likely just beginning. Every passing minute was another thread unraveling the tapestry of his 7-year marriage. Ethan slowly turned away from the desk, his movements deliberate and heavy. The adrenaline of discovery had completely evaporated, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He walked out of the office and began a slow, agonizing procession through the sprawling house. He passed the expensive, abstract art Victoria had curated for the hallway, pieces he had never truly understood but had praised because they made her smile. He trailed his hand along the pristine marble countertop of the kitchen island, a space that had seen hundreds of quiet, domestic mornings that were now entirely tainted by the dark amber scent of a man who had never really left. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an eviction. He had been living in a house built on a fault line of someone else's unresolved history. He climbed the stairs to their master suite, the same room where she had coldly dismissed him hours earlier. He pulled a medium-sized duffel bag from the top shelf of his closet. The methodical act of packing felt surreal, like he was observing someone else dismantle their life. He didn't take much. A few changes of clothes, his passport, his laptop, and the essential documents he kept in a small fireproof safe. He left behind the expensive suits she had bought him to try and mold him into something he wasn't. He left the expensive watches she had gifted him on anniversaries that now felt like elaborate, mocking performances. Every item he touched felt radioactive with the memory of her touch, her voice, her carefully constructed lies. As he zipped the duffel bag closed, he caught his reflection in the large vanity mirror. He looked exactly the same as he had when she left. The same slightly rumpled sweater, the same tired eyes, but the man looking back was fundamentally altered. He was no longer a husband. He was a casualty of a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. He could wait. He could sit in the dark living room, the houndstooth scarf draped across his lap, and confront her when she finally walked through the front door at dawn. He could watch the blood drain from her face as he played the audio of her telling Derek she couldn't stand to look at him anymore. The desire for that explosive, devastating confrontation burned hot in his chest for a fleeting moment. It would be a messy, cathartic detonation of the truth. But as he looked around the sterile perfection of the bedroom, he realized that any reaction, anger, tears, demands for an explanation, would only validate her cruel assessment of him. She had told him he didn't belong in her world, that he would embarrass her. A screaming match in the foyer would only prove her right. It would give Derek Stone the ultimate victory, the pathetic, broken husband fighting for scraps of a woman who was already gone. Ethan hoisted the duffel bag over his shoulder. The weight of his decision settled heavily into his bones. He wasn't going to fight for a ghost. He was going to walk away, leaving the hollow shell of their marriage exactly as he found it, immaculate, silent, and entirely empty. Ethan descended the sweeping staircase of the Oakwood Estates home for the last time, his footsteps muffled against the plush runner. The house was a cavernous tomb of carefully curated lies, the air stale and heavily scented with the phantom trace of Victoria's dark amber perfume. His duffel bag bumped gently against his hip, containing the sparse remnants of a 7-year marriage. He didn't feel rage anymore. The fiery betrayal had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, expansive ash of absolute clarity. He paused in the center of the immaculate kitchen. The gleaming marble island, usually the stage for their quiet, disconnected morning coffees, felt vast and alien under the harsh glow of the pendant lights. He dropped his keys onto the counter with a heavy, metallic clatter that echoed through the silence. Beside them, he placed the heavy silk houndstooth scarf he had retrieved from his home office. The expensive fabric pooled softly on the cold stone, a tangible, damning testament to the ghost of Derek Stone that had haunted every corner of his life. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was dark, completely devoid of any missed calls or texts from Victoria. He unlocked it, navigating past the shared calendar app that still highlighted the reservation at the Archer Hotel. He didn't open a messaging app to compose a furious, hateful paragraph detailing his discoveries. He didn't draft a bitter email to her corporate address demanding an explanation. Any words he left behind would only be twisted into defensive arguments or dismissed as the ravings of the inadequate man she believed him to be. Instead, he initiated a full factory reset on the device, erasing his digital footprint from their shared existence. He set the phone down next to the keys and the scarf. The physical act of severance was almost complete. He looked down at his left hand. The simple gold band, which he had worn with unwavering, naive pride, felt unnaturally tight against his skin. It wasn't a symbol of a partnership. It was a shackle anchoring him to a woman who had used him as a temporary refuge. With a slow, deliberate motion, Ethan twisted the ring over his knuckle. The metal scraped faintly against his flesh before sliding free. He didn't throw it across the room in a cinematic display of grief. He didn't hurl it out the window into the freezing Chicago night. He simply placed it in the exact center of the dark silk houndstooth fabric. The gold band caught the ambient light, a stark, painful contrast against the sophisticated pattern of her lover's scarf. It was the only message she would ever need. The juxtaposition of his loyalty against her enduring obsession. Ethan zipped his heavy winter coat, the fabric stiff and cold against his neck. He picked up his duffel bag and walked toward the front door without looking back. He didn't glance at the framed wedding photos in the hallway, nor did he linger to memorize the lines of the house he had mistakenly called a home. He opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the biting, frost-laden air. The driveway was empty, save for the faint tire tracks Victoria's Uber had left behind hours ago. The silence outside was different than the suffocating quiet of the house. It was vast, indifferent, and entirely his own. He began the long walk toward the neighborhood entrance, his breath pluming in the icy air. The weight of the duffel bag pulled at his shoulder, a physical reminder of the life he was leaving behind. As the grand, familiar facade of the Oakwood Estates house disappeared into the darkness, Ethan felt a strange, hollow peace settle over him. He hadn't lost a battle tonight. He had simply stopped fighting a war he was never meant to win. I didn't lose my wife to another man. I lost her to a version of herself she never truly left behind.